The north is cold and full of whispers.
King's Landing smelled like ambition and rot. Jon had lived inside its walls long enough to stop noticing, which was its own kind of problem. His room in the White Sword Tower was small, proper bed, east-facing window, armor chest, weapon rack spaced the way Jaime had taught him. Not luxurious. Functional, the room of someone the castle had made space for without quite deciding what to call him. Lord Commander Barristan Selmy had once called him the Ward, and the word had landed like a stone dropped into still water. Not a squire, not a hostage, not a bastard, though the castle knew he was that. The Ward. At 16, Jon had learned that the simplest word was usually the sharpest. He was awake before the bells. Always, Jaime had started that at age 7, the men who sleep until the bells are already losing. By 16 it was in his body. He dressed in the dark, gambeson, practiced leathers, boots, and went to the yard. Jaime was already there. No white cloak. No armor. Just a man who knew how to fight, standing in the Kingsguard's private yard at 4 in the morning. Because this was what he did with Jon, and had done since Jon was old enough to hold a sword without dropping it. They didn't speak. Jon came in fast, diagonal cut from the right, testing. Jaime deflected without moving his feet. His counter came back inside. Low. Jon moved left. Not enough. The practice blade caught his hip with a thud that would bruise by afternoon. Too slow on the rotation. Jaime said. I moved. You moved your head first. Your head is not what saves your ribs. They went again. And again. Jaime's heel rotation, barely visible, the back foot pivoting, the torso shifting 5 degrees, opened a gap that Jon's diagonal cut went through cleanly. Jaime was already inside his guard. Tell me what you saw, Jaime said. Hone ran the exchange back. Not the outcome. The mechanics. Your heel. Right foot. Before anything else moved. The expression that crossed Jaime's face was as close to approval as he managed before breakfast. I've beaten men 4 times with that movement. They've never named it afterward. You saw it on the second exchange. He lowered the blade. Watch feet. Never faces. The face lies on purpose. Feet can't. 3 clean touches in 70 exchanges. Against Jaime Lannister, that was progress. When Jaime said enough and walked inside, Jon sat on the stone bench and thought about the hesitation, the fraction of a second at the moment of commitment, where he asked himself if he was sure. Not a technical problem. Something underneath the technique. He always felt, at the last possible moment, that he was about to do something he hadn't been authorized to do. He didn't know where that came from. He went to find Bronn. Bronn was at his corner table in the Broken Clasp, a tavern in the Street of Steel's less respectable half, with a cup of something that wasn't ale, and the alert quality of a man whose relaxation was entirely performance. The night catch you on the hip? Bronn said. 3 times. Same move. Learning from it? To watch his feet. Bronn looked at him with the expression he used when an answer was technically correct and completely missing the point. They went outside. The alley behind the tavern, 3 feet wide, wet stone, a barrel against the wall, old rope near a broken doorway. Bronn gestured at it. No footwork here, he said. Jon looked at the ground. At the wet section near the cooperage, the dry section near the barrel. At the angles. Move him onto the wet stone, Jon said. Corner myself at the barrel, let him press. When his weight is forward, I use the rope. The knight would call that cheating. Is it? The man who wins calls it what he wants. Bronn moved. No wind-up, no telegraph. And was inside Jon's arm with a grip on his elbow joint before Jon registered the shift. Dead, Bronn said. I know. You went left because you expected me to expect right. Bronn released him. So I expected you to go left. He looked at Jon steadily. The moment a good fighter recognizes your training school, he stops fighting you and starts fighting your teacher. And your teacher isn't there. He pushed off the wall. Don't let him know what training you had. An hour of market routes followed. Bronn showed him a grip break, inside of the elbow, interrupting the arm's function, regardless of the strength behind it. Jon learned it from Fleabottom by way of a man 3 times Bronn's size, and a decision Bronn had made very young. "Decided," Bronn said, when Jon asked if surviving was talent or choice. "I decided I was going to be harder to kill than whatever came at me. The night decided to be the best." They looked the same from outside. Back through the lower market gate, through the service corridor, Jon nearly walked into two household clerks in the door of the record room. The rounder one saw him and made the calculation of someone whose information was slightly more valuable than Jon's rank was threatening. "The king's taking quite the party to Winterfell, Lord. There's been discussion about whether he takes his bastards." He said bastards the way people said it when they meant the plural that included Jon specifically. "The Dornish ward. The question is whether your presence makes for an uncomfortable situation at Winterfell, given Lord Stark's feelings on the subject." He paused helpfully. "Lord Stark raised a bastard of his own there, they say, some woman's son from the war. Lady Stark never forgave him for it." Jon kept his face still and kept walking. Lord Stark's bastard. He had heard this mentioned before, without significance. He thought about it now and could not precisely say why. In the afternoon yard, Joffrey was sparring badly with a household knight who was performing mediocrity on his behalf. He saw Jon watching and said, "Spar with me," in the voice of someone who had framed a trap as an invitation. Jon recognized the shape of it. He picked up a blade and managed the next 10 minutes carefully. Reading Joffrey's tells, seeing every opening, taking none of them. On the fifth exchange, Joffrey landed a properly thrown shoulder strike. Jon took it honestly. He saw the moment Joffrey understood. Not satisfaction, something sharper. Joffrey had Cersei's eyes and Cersei's specific ability to read social geometry when it mattered to him. What he was reading was management. Jon was managing him. They both knew it now. That evening, finding Jaime in the corridor, he knew. "He's going to hate you for it," Jaime said. "I don't know what else to do. Neither do I. That's the problem." In the library, briefly, Tyrion with his mismatched eyes and his wine. "Lord Stark is someone I'm curious to observe you meeting. Just curious. It's how I pass the time." The word just sitting there after he left. Doing work. The summons came at the 8th bell. The private hall, Robert's choice for conversations he wanted real rather than official. He was standing at the fireplace when Jon came in evening clothes, the clothes of a man who had set aside the performance of kingship for an hour. He looked at Jon with the searching expression Jon had spent 16 years learning to read without being able to name. "I've been hearing things about your training," Robert said. "Jaime says you're becoming something worth watching." Jaime is careful about who he says that about. Sir Jaime is generous. Jaime is many things. Robert moved from the fireplace. "He told me we're going north. Winterfell. Ned Stark. Been too long." The heaviness behind it was real. The tiredness of a man who had been king for 15 years and had found it something other than expected. "I want you to come." Jon looked at him. "You want me specifically. You're mine, aren't you?" Robert said. And then, with the roughness of a word that didn't fit comfortably in his mouth, "You're my ward. It makes sense." "I'll go," Jon said. "If Sir Jaime's going." "Jaime's going." Robert looked at him with the searching expression longer this time. "You look," he started the sentence and did not finish it. "Your Grace?" Jon said. "Nothing," Robert turned back to the fire. "Be ready when the preparations are done." 2 weeks. Jon left. He walked back through the corridors he had known since before he could remember knowing them, and thought about the sentence Robert hadn't finished, and about the round clerk's casual accounting of the cover story, and about Lord Stark who had looked at him for 2 seconds in a courtyard that hadn't happened yet and already felt inevitable. Ravens flew north that night. The king was coming. 300 people, the full weight of Robert Baratheon's rule moving north along the King's Road. And Jon Snow, the ward, the Dornish bastard, the boy in black and gold armor, was going with them. Whether he was ready or not. The hunt left the Red Keep at first light with 30 horses, 24 hounds, and enough noise to tell anything worth killing that it should leave. Robert hunted the way he did everything, loudly, with total commitment and occasional disregard for what his commitment cost the people around him. He rode at the front of the column on a destrier that looked like it had been selected specifically for its ability to carry a man of Robert's current mass without expressing an opinion about it. He was already drinking from a skin of arbor gold at the 3rd hour of the morning, laughing at something one of the lesser lords had said, his voice carrying through the Kingswood like something the trees had agreed to accommodate. Jon rode midway down the column, not at the back where the servants and the junior household men were, but not at the front either. The position he'd occupied in every public situation since he was old enough to understand what positions meant, present enough to be seen, removed enough not to require managing. The hounds cut left into a dense thicket 20 minutes past the first clearing. The huntmaster knew his business. There was a boar in the Kingswood's southern section that had been there long enough to develop a reputation, and Robert had been talking about killing it for 2 weeks. The dogs found the scent in the thicket, and the whole column reorganized itself around the pursuit, men spreading out by experience and instinct, the ones who knew what they were doing going one way, the ones who didn't going another. Jon went left. Not because the huntmaster signaled it, because the ground to the left was lower, and the boar, if it was running the way Jon would run if he were a boar of some reputation trying to outlast a mounted pursuit, would be heading for the creek bed at the bottom of the slope, where the ground was soft and tangled, and horses were substantially less useful than they were on open ground. He came around the base of a stand of old oak in time to find the boar in the creek bed exactly where he'd expected it, and the boar had turned to face the sound of the dogs, which was the moment an experienced animal made when it decided running was finished, and something else was beginning. He was not mounted. He had left his horse at the top of the slope because the slope was too steep and too wet, and the horse would have cost him 2 minutes he didn't have. The boar weighed perhaps 300 pounds, which was less than Robert but more than Jon, and had tusks that the Red Keep's huntmaster had specifically warned about at the pre-hunt briefing. Jon had a boar spear, 8 feet of ash with a crossguard, 18 inches below the blade to stop the animal's charge from riding up the shaft, and 4 seconds to think about what he was doing. He planted the butt of the spear in the roots at the bank of the creek. The boar charged. Physics handled the rest of it. The crossguard caught and held. The spear took the animal's full momentum and redirected it into the ground. The boar's own velocity killed it more effectively than Jon's arms could have managed alone. He stepped clear, kept the spear, and looked at what was at his feet with the steady quality he'd been developing through years of training. Not triumph, not relief. Assessment. Clean kill. No wasted motion. The hounds arrived a minute later. Robert arrived 2 minutes after that, pushing through the undergrowth on foot since even he had apparently understood the slope. He looked at Jon. He looked at the boar. He looked at Jon again. "You came off your horse," Robert said. "The slope wasn't rideable," Jon said. "Most men would have waited for the dogs to corner it," Robert said. "The dogs would have pushed it across the creek," Jon said, "into the briars on the other side. It would have been in there for an hour." Robert looked at the boar, at the spear which was still in it, the plant point still deep in the root system of the bank. He started laughing. It was the real laugh, not the court laugh. The laugh that came from somewhere below the public performance of being king, and landed as the sound of a man who had just been genuinely surprised. He clapped Jon on the shoulder, hard enough that Jon had to set his feet. "Come off the horse." Robert said again, still laughing, shaking his head. Ned Stark would have done the same bloody thing. The man never met a horse he thought was necessary. He was still laughing when the rest of the hunting party arrived. At the feast that evening, Robert told the story twice. The first time was to the table generally, in the expansive, detail-embellishing way Robert told all stories. The boar grew slightly larger with each sentence. The angle of the slope became steeper. But at the center of the story, unchanged through both tellings, was Jon on foot with a spear and the boar dead at the bank. The boy came off his horse. Robert said to the assembled lords and their companions, the minor court members, the knights who hadn't been on the hunt. Rode to the slope, looked at it, decided the horse was the problem, and left it at the top. He looked down the table at Jon. Not 1 man in 10 thinks clearly enough under pressure to know when the thing he's been trained to do is the wrong thing. Jon looked at his plate. The table responded the way tables responded to the king approving of something, warmly, generally, without much individual character. Joffrey was 2 seats to Robert's left. Jon had been watching him without appearing to. Joffrey's face went through 3 expressions in the time it took Robert to finish the second telling. The first was the expression of a boy at a table when his father is talking about something that isn't him. The second was the expression of that same boy realizing that something that isn't him has a face and a name. The third was the expression of someone who has understood a new piece of geometry about their world and found the new geometry disagreeable. He looked at Jon with his mother's eyes. Measuring, Jon picked up his cup and looked at the far end of the table. He felt Joffrey's attention the way you feel the specific heat of a fire that is slightly too close. Not immediate, not yet, but present. Directional, Robert was already on the next story. Cersei Lannister found Jaime before the 8th bell. She moved through the upper corridor the way she moved through all spaces, owned, already, by virtue of the act of entering them. The torches threw her shadow long and gold on the stone behind her. She said nothing until the corridor was empty in both directions. He told the story twice. She said. Jaime was leaning against the wall opposite a narrow window. He said nothing. At the table, Cersei said, in front of every lord present, in front of Joffrey. Her voice was the temperature of the corridor in January, not raised, not rough, precisely controlled. Your ward. Your boy. He made a good kill, Jaime said. I'm not talking about the kill. I know. She studied him. You've been building him for 16 years. I've been training him, Jaime said. There's a difference. Is there? It wasn't a question. Robert praised him tonight in front of half the court, by name, with warmth. She let that sit for a moment. Robert doesn't praise Joffrey like that. Robert and Joffrey have a complicated, I know what they have. Her voice dropped a degree colder. I'm telling you what the court sees. They see a bastard ward receiving what the prince doesn't, and they are very good at turning what they see into position. Jaime looked at her. He's not a threat to Joffrey, Jaime said. He's not supposed to be anything at all. Cersei said. That was the arrangement. He lives here, he trains, he stays invisible. He doesn't become something Robert points at in front of witnesses. Jaime said nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. I want him kept back during the progress, she said. Managed, out of Robert's direct company. Robert wants him in the party, Jaime said. He told the boy himself. Something moved behind Cersei's eyes. The expression she wore when a configuration had arrived that she had considered and found unacceptable. She turned, walked back toward the far end of the corridor. Watch him, she said. Not a request. I always do, Jaime said. She was already gone. The word came at mid-morning 3 days later. The preparations were complete. The wagons were provisioned. The wheelhouses were ready. The column would move at dawn in 4 days. 300 people, the full weight of a royal progress, organized and aimed north. A page found Jon in the practice yard and delivered the message with the careful formality of someone who had been told the message was important without being told why. Sir Jaime's instructions, Memlord. Your kit is to be packed by the 2nd bell tomorrow. Full armor, travel leathers, the ceremonial pieces. He paused. The king wants you riding near the front of the column. Jon looked at the page. Near the front. He looked at the eastern wall of the Red Keep. Beyond it, somewhere past the horizon, past the riverlands and the neck and the vast cold distance of the north, was a gray stone castle called Winterfell. He went inside to pack. The north arrived before Winterfell did. It arrived as a quality of air, colder, cleaner, carrying pine and something underneath the pine that had no southern equivalent. The column had been on the King's Road for 34 days, and the transition hadn't been a line crossed. It had been a gradual replacement of one world with another. The riverlands gave way to the neck, and the neck gave way to open sky and flat land, and a cold that had opinions about you. By the time Winterfell's towers appeared above the tree line, gray stone against gray sky, Jon had been breathing the north for 2 days. He had not been north before. He didn't know why that should matter. He had been raised in a castle, and had lived in that castle for his entire life, and had no particular attachment to the idea of any other landscape. But something in the air at this latitude sat differently in his chest than the Kingswood air, than the Blackwater air, than the hot stone smell of King's Landing on a summer afternoon. He noticed it the way you notice something your body recognizes before your mind catches up. He put it away. The gates of Winterfell opened. Eddard Stark was already in the courtyard. He had come out to receive the column with his household around him, bannermen, servants, guards in grey Stark colors, his wife beside him, his children in a line. Jon saw them from the middle of the column before anyone in the courtyard could resolve individual faces from the approaching mass of people. He had a moment, therefore, to look at the Stark family before being looked at. Robb Stark was about his own age, taller, broader, auburn-haired, with the kind of physical confidence that came from being heir to something large and knowing it from birth. He stood like his ground was his. Beside him a girl of 11 or 12, with her mother's red tully hair and her mother's blue eyes, standing straight in the way of someone who had been told standing straight mattered and believed it. 3 younger children, smaller, including a dark-haired girl who was already fidgeting with the ceremony of it. Lady Catelyn Stark, tall, composed, the particular beauty of a woman who has decided composure is more useful than warmth and has been right about it long enough that the composure has become structural. And Ned Stark. Jon had seen Ned Stark once before, in passing, a memory so faint it might have been constructed from description rather than experience. But the man in the courtyard now was present in a way that made the word passing seem inaccurate. He was not tall. He was not remarkable in the way Robert was remarkable. What he was solid. Not physical solidity, the solidity of a man whose relationship with his own convictions had been tested and had held. He had gray eyes. He had dark hair, shot through now with gray at the temples. He had a face that did not perform anything. The column halted. Robert descended. Jon stayed mounted and watched Ned Stark see the king, and then watched Ned Stark see him. It happened in the way things happen when someone is exercising significant control over their face and is not quite fast enough. Robert embraced Ned, loud, the same hug that required Ned's whole body to absorb it. And when they separated, Ned's eyes moved over the column. They moved across the column the way a careful man scans a room, quickly, comprehensively, not settling. They settled on Jon. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. Long enough. Ned Stark looked at Jon Snow in Baratheon black and Lannister gold, 16 years old and sitting a horse in the courtyard of Winterfell. And his face did something it did not do for the rest of the reception. It went very still. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing his expression. The stillness of a man managing something larger than his expression. Jon inclined his head slightly. Ned Stark looked away. The reception moved inside. The formalities of presenting households and establishing arrangements and feeding 300 people who had been on the road for 34 days consumed the afternoon in the practical and merciless way of logistics. Jon occupied the edges of it. He had experience with the edges of events and was good at them. He accepted a cup of ale from a Winterfell servant, stood near the far end of the great hall, and watched the Stark household reckon with the sudden, full-weight presence of the royal court in their home. Robb Stark found him, not accidentally, with the directness of a boy who had been told certain things about certain people and had decided to investigate. "You're Snow," Robb said. No title. Not hostile, just factual in the way Northerners were factual. "The ward," Jon said. Robb looked at him with the gray eyes. Catelyn's coloring. Ned's eyes. He studied Jon in the way his father had studied him in the courtyard, with more youth behind it, but the same quality of honest attention. "You ride well," Robb said. "So do you," Jon said. "I watched you come through the gate." He said it the way someone admits to something they were doing anyway. Near the front. The king wanted the party riding together. Robb nodded slowly. He was working something out. Jon could see it, not suspicion, but the arithmetic of a boy trying to place someone in a category his categories hadn't been built for. "You trained with Sir Jaime," Robb said, "for 9 years. And someone else. I heard someone say, a sellsword." "Bronn," Jon said. Robb turned that over. "A knight and a sellsword. Different problems," Jon said. "Different teachers." Robb looked at him for another moment. Then, with the abruptness of someone who has decided a conversation is satisfactory and is moving on, he nodded once, the nod of a boy who will think about what he's observed later, privately, when there's time for it, and turned back toward his household. Jon watched him go. Catelyn Stark had been watching the exchange from across the hall. When Jon looked up, she looked away. Jaime found Ned Stark in the passage behind the Great Hall. Jon was not supposed to be in that passage. He was in it because the passage ran parallel to the servery corridor and was quieter. He heard the voices before he identified them, and had turned to leave when Ned Stark said Jaime's name in a voice that stopped him. "Kingslayer," Ned said. "Stark," Jaime said. The word that passed between those two names was 15 years of everything that had never been resolved. "You've grown him well," Ned said. A pause. "He's grown himself, mostly," Jaime said. "I gave him tools. He built something with them. He looks—" Ned stopped. "I know what he looks like," Jaime said, quietly. "I've been looking at him for 16 years. Jon stood very still. "Does he know?" Ned said. "No." "Does he ask?" "He asks around the edges," Jaime said. "He's never asked directly. He's the kind of person who waits until he's ready for the answer." A pause. "He's almost ready." Silence in the passage, long enough that Jon counted his own heartbeats. "Robert can't know," Ned said. "Robert won't know," Jaime said. "He looks at Jon and sees what he wants to see. He's been doing that for 16 years too." "And Cersei." "Cersei sees too much," Jaime said. "She always has. But she doesn't know what she's seeing. She thinks the problem is political." Another pause. "It's not." Ned's voice, when it came back, was lower. "Why?" Ned said. "All of it." Why? Jaime was quiet for long enough that Jon thought he might not answer. "Because someone had to," Jaime said. "Because I was there and it mattered, and the other options were worse." He paused. "Because he's worth it. I know you have no reason to believe that from me. But he is." The passage was quiet. "I want to speak with him," Ned said. "Before we leave Winterfell." "Privately, I know," Jaime said. "So does he, I think. He just doesn't know what the conversation is yet." Footsteps moved away. Jon stood in the passage with his back against the cold stone of Winterfell and listened to the silence they left behind. His hands were steady, his breathing was even. But something in his chest was working through a reckoning it hadn't been invited to begin yet. He had known, in the way you know things that live below words, that there was a conversation waiting for him, that Ned Stark was a piece of it, that Winterfell was somehow the right place for it to arrive. Outside, through the thick walls, the cold moved across the courtyard. He pushed off the stone. Went back inside. The ambush was professional. That was the first thing Jon understood about it, not while it was happening, because while it was happening there was no room for understanding anything beyond the immediate geometry of bodies and weapons and ground. But afterward, turning the mechanics of it over in his mind, the word that kept arriving was professional. Not opportunistic. Not desperate. Planned, resourced, and executed by men who knew what they were doing and had done similar things before. They hit the column at the 3rd hour of afternoon, in a section of the King's Road that ran between two low ridges covered in dense undergrowth. The ridges were not high enough to be called hills. They were high enough to hold 30 men without those men being visible from the road until they chose to be. The first arrow came out of the left ridge. It hit the led outrider's horse in the neck. The horse went down sideways, taking the outrider with it, and the column's forward momentum compressed into itself, the way a column always compresses when the front stops. A wave of confusion running backward through the ranks, horses reacting to the horse ahead reacting, men grabbing for weapons they hadn't been holding. Jon's hand found the short blade at his hip before he'd consciously decided to reach for it. Not the ceremonial pieces. He'd left those in his travel chest 3 days ago. Because 12 days on the King's Road had taught him that the ceremonial pieces were impractical for anything except looking like something at a distance. The short blade was Braavosi-influenced, single-edged, 20 inches of plain steel with a grip that didn't slip in wet conditions. Bronn had given it to him 2 years ago without explanation. And Jon had kept it because it fit his hand in the specific way useful things fit. He looked at the ridges. He looked at the road. He looked at the column's configuration, where the gaps were, where the bodies were densest, where the horses were already becoming problems, versus where they were still controllable. Jaime was 6 horses back. Jon could see his white cloak, which in this moment was the least useful thing about Sir Jaime Lannister. Bronn was, Jon scanned, there, right flank, already off his horse, already moving laterally toward the base of the right ridge, in a low line that kept him below the sight line of anything on the ridge itself. He'd done this in the first 15 seconds. He'd done it before the second arrow came. The second arrow came. And the third, and then it was no longer individual arrows. It was a volley, short-ranged and aimed at the column's center where the density of people and animals made missing difficult. Jon drove his horse left, off the road, into the ditch. The horse didn't want to go. He made it go. They came out of the ditch on the far side and into the 5-foot margin between the road's edge and the base of the left ridge, where the angle made the archers above nearly useless. The men on the ridge saw this and adjusted. 3 of them came down the slope. Not archers, blades, shorter weapons, suited for the tight ground of a slope's base. They came fast, using the terrain the way men who had chosen this ground chose it because they knew it. Jon had 3 seconds. He thought about Jaime's lesson and Bronn's lesson simultaneously, and what came out was neither of them separately. It came out as something the situation required that happened to use both. The first man was faster down the slope than his companions. He came in with a short sword held high, not stupid. A high grip gave him the advantage of the slope. Jon moved into him, not away, not laterally. Into him, and to his left, which was the downhill side, which destroyed the advantage the slope provided the moment he left it. The man's high swing came through empty air. Jon's blade caught him across the inside of his forearm on the return. Not killing, but the arm stopped working, and the sword landed in the mud at the slope's base. The second man was more careful. He'd seen the first. He slowed on the approach, came in lower, not committing. Jon had been fast and inside. He showed careful man something different. He stepped back, creating distance, which read as hesitation, which was what careful man wanted to see. Careful man pressed. Jon stepped left toward the ridge base, where the roots of a large oak broke through the muddy ground in a tangle, and didn't move his feet again. Careful man's press brought his own feet into the roots. The stumble was half a second. Jon covered the distance and drove his elbow into the man's jaw before the blade came up. He went down. 2. The third man stopped 6 feet out and looked at what had happened to his companions in under 20 seconds. He ran. Jon let him. He was breathing through his mouth. His left arm had a hot line across the forearm where the first man's initial movement had grazed him before the parry connected. Not deep, barely bleeding, but present. He hadn't felt it until just now. From the right ridge, noise, shouting, steel on steel, the specific percussion of a fight happening in close terrain. Then, nothing. Bronn came back over the ridge's crest 4 minutes later. He came down the slope at his own pace, sheathing something that had started this exercise clean and had not remained that way. His expression was the expression he wore after any successfully completed practical problem, no satisfaction exactly, just the neutral quality of a task processed and filed. He looked at Jon's forearm. How deep? He said. Shallow, Jon said. Bronn looked at it himself, accepted this assessment. Looked at the 2 men on the ground. Third one ran, Jon said. I know. I saw him from the ridge. Bronn looked at the man with the ruined forearm, who was conscious and cradling it in the mud, and at the one Jon had put down with the elbow, who was not conscious and was breathing with his mouth open in the mud. The root trick. His feet went into the roots, Jon said. You put his feet into the roots, Bronn said. Jon didn't correct this. Jaime arrived from the road, white cloak torn at the shoulder, blood on his sword hand that Jon was almost certain was not his own. He looked at the scene at the ridge base with the systematic quality of a man accounting for all relevant information before drawing a conclusion. You're cut, Jaime said. Shallow, Jon said. Jaime looked at Bronn. 31 men. Bronn said both ridges. 12 dead, 8 incapacitated. The rest ran when it became clear the column had weapons and was using them. He paused. Professional, I noticed, Jaime said. Not local. Bronn said. Boots were wrong for the Riverlands. 3 different accent types when they were shouting. Hired from at least 2 different places, assembled for this specific job. He looked at the ridge. Someone paid well for short timeline and multiple sources. That's how you avoid a chain that leads back. Jaime was quiet. Jon looked at the man with the ruined forearm. He was shivering in the mud and making small sounds. Jon crouched down, looked at his boots. Bronn was right. Leather-soled, worn smooth, the kind of sole that was made for cobblestones rather than the specific mud of a Riverlands ditch. City boots. He stood back up. 30 men for a column this size, Jon said. That's not trying to kill the column. No, Bronn said. They hit the front first, brought it down, compressed everyone together. Jon thought through the geometry of it. If you want to kill one specific person in a compressed column, you create chaos, you wait for the column to break, and the specific person separates from the crowd when they react. And then you have them in the margins, Bronn said, away from the body of the party, without their guard. He looked at Jon steadily, like a boy who drives his horse into a ditch on the left side and ends up alone at the base of a ridge with 3 men coming down at him. Jon looked at him. They weren't trying to kill the column, Jon said. No, Bronn said. They were trying to kill me. That's how I'm reading it, Bronn said. Unless you've done something recently to make the Riverlands angry, which seems unlikely. Jaime said nothing. Jon looked at Jaime. Jaime was looking at the ridge with the expression Jon had learned was his least readable, the one that meant several things were being processed simultaneously and none of them were available for discussion yet. The 3rd man that ran. Jon said, he'll go back to whoever paid for this. Yes, Bronn said. And tell them what happened. That 30 professionals couldn't deliver the job, Bronn said. That the target identified the ground, handled 3 men alone, and didn't run. He paused. Whoever ordered this had an idea of what they were buying when they set this up. Now they know the idea was wrong. He looked at Jon without softening what came next. When the idea is wrong, people who like results revise the idea. They don't abandon the objective, they send something bigger. The ridge was quiet above them. The road noise was picking back up, the column reorganizing, men shouting instructions, the injured outrider being attended to. Jon looked at his forearm. The shallow cut had stopped bleeding. So whoever ordered this, Jon said, now knows I'm worth the cost of a larger effort. That's about the shape of it, Bronn said. He said it the way he said everything, without drama, without modification. Just the true weight of it, placed in Jon's hands for him to carry. Jon looked south, toward King's Landing, toward the Red Keep and its corridors and its specific architecture of power and exposure and careful constructed cover stories. He picked up his horse's reins. They went back to the road. The Tower of the Hand had a room on its 4th level that nobody used for anything official. It had been a records room at some point. The shelves were still there, empty now, the wood going soft at the edges with age and damp. A single window faced north. The floor was stone, unadorned, cold enough in the morning that it pushed through boot leather and made itself known. Robert had chosen it for this conversation specifically. Jon understood why before Robert said a word. The Tower of the Hand had no hand currently. The position was empty, had been empty since Jon Arryn's death, which meant the tower's staff had thinned to maintenance and the rooms were as private as anything in the Red Keep got. Nobody came here. Nobody had a reason to. Robert was standing at the north window when Jon arrived. He looked out over the city the way he rarely looked at it from the throne room, directly, without the mediation of ceremony. King's Landing in the early morning was gray and busy, the lower districts already loud with the noise of commerce and argument and the particular chaos of 500,000 people starting another day. "Jon O'Slint," Robert said, without turning. "Your Grace." Jon said, "You know him, by reputation," Jon said, "and by observation." Robert turned. He had the look he sometimes carried the morning after a decision had been reached rather than a night it was still being made, the particular settled quality of a man who has finished the argument with himself and arrived somewhere. "Tell me what you've observed," Robert said. Jon thought about how to answer honestly without performing the answer. He runs the gold cloaks like a merchant runs a business, Jon said. Protection sold at varying rates depending on what the buyer can afford. Assignments distributed based on what each assignment is worth to him, not what each assignment requires. The men who perform are not the men who advance. He paused. The men who advance are the men who understand the arrangement and participate in it. Robert looked at him. 2,000 men, Robert said. Approximately, Jon said. 2,000 men operating like that in my city. He turned back to the window. Jon Arryn knew. He was building a case. Didn't finish it. Jon said nothing. You're 16, Robert said. It was not a criticism. It was information being placed in the room. Yes, Jon said. The lords will object, Robert said. The ones on Slint's arrangement. They'll call it age, inexperience, a bastard boy playing at command. He looked at Jon directly. Are they wrong? Jon did not look away. About the age, no, Jon said. About the rest, I can either answer that or demonstrate it. Demonstrating it takes longer. The answer is faster. Robert almost smiled. It went somewhere else before arriving fully. I'm not giving you the gold cloaks because you handled 3 men on a Riverland slope, Robert said. That's not the reason. I know. Jon said. Tell me the reason. Jon considered. Because Slint is bought, Jon said, and you need someone who isn't. And the people who aren't bought are the people who don't have the right shape for buying, either because they have too much already, or because they've decided something matters more than what's being offered. He paused. You've calculated that I fall in the second category. Robert looked at him for a long, still moment. Don't make me wrong about that, Robert said. He walked past Jon toward the door. Slint is relieved today, Robert said. You have the command. Jaime will handle the formal transfer. He stopped at the door without turning. And Jon. When the lords complain, and they will, let them. He left. Jon stood at the north window. Below, the city moved without any awareness of what had just happened in the empty records room above it. 2,000 men. He looked at his hands. Janos Slint received the news in his office in the watch barracks, which smelled of tallow and old armor and the specific staleness of a space occupied by someone who considered it permanent. He had made it permanent. That was visible in the room. Furniture that had no institutional reason for existing, a carved chair, a cabinet with a lock, a side table with wine that was better than anything in the watch's official provisions. Slint looked at Jaime across the desk. Jaime was in full Kingsguard whites. He had dressed for this deliberately. The white cloak was the point of it, not the threat of the sword, the authority of the cloak. There must be a mistake, Slint said. There isn't, Jaime said. The boy is 16 years old, Slint said. His voice carried the particular register of a man whose sense of order has been violated at the Foundation. He has no experience of command. He has no rank, no title, no history in the Watch. He is a bastard ward with a sword he's been taught to use by the king's decision. Jaime said. Not a discussion. Slint looked at him. You'll have my keys by the second bell, Jaime said. Slint looked at the cabinet, at the carved chair, at the bottle on the side table. He put the keys on the desk. Jon walked through the barracks at midday. Not announced. Not ceremonial. He walked through the barracks the way he walked through the market routes Bronn used for lessons, taking inventory, reading the room that existed rather than the room someone was presenting. What he found was a watch in 2 distinct halves. The first half he identified by the way they held themselves when he passed. A specific quality of attention, cautious, recalibrating. These were men who had operated inside the arrangement and were now performing the arithmetic of what the arrangement's end cost them personally. The second half he identified differently. They were the men who looked at him and said nothing, who stood slightly straighter when he passed, not because someone had told them to, but because the action was instinctive, the reflex of people who had been waiting for something to be different and were now recalibrating toward the possibility that something was. He stopped at a training yard inside the barracks. 12 men were working through drill rotation. 3 of them were doing it wrong in ways that suggested they were doing it wrong habitually, without correction. The supervising sergeant, a heavy-set man, 40 or so, a scar on his jaw that had healed badly, saw Jon stop and watched him watch the drill. Jon picked up a training blade from the rack. He walked to the nearest of the three men drilling incorrectly, didn't say anything, stood beside him and mirrored the man's footwork, slowly, exaggerating the flaw, then corrected it in real time, showing the adjustment physically rather than naming it. The man looked at him. "Again," Jon said. The man drilled again. "Better." Jon moved to the second, did the same thing. Third, done, he put the training blade back on the rack. He looked at the supervising sergeant. "When was the last rotation inspection?" Jon said. 3 months, the sergeant said. "Careful, not defensive." "Weekly from now," Jon said. "The problems I saw in 4 minutes of watching have been building for weeks. Weekly inspection catches them while they're still corrections, and not habits." The sergeant looked at him with the calculation of a man deciding if the person in front of him understood what they were talking about. "Yes, m'lord," he said. Jon walked on. By the 6th bell, he had walked through every section of the barracks. He had identified 7 men whose advancement had no relationship to any observable skill, Slint's arrangement. Visible in their rank and their performance like a record that hadn't been updated to match reality. He had identified 4 who had been passed over repeatedly despite visible competence. He made adjustments. He did it without ceremony. He called the relevant men individually in a small room off the main corridor and told each of them plainly what was changing and why. He used the minimum of words required to be fully clear. By the 8th bell, the barracks had a specific quality Jon recognized from Bronn's description of how a room feels when it is deciding whether to believe something. The decision was not made yet. It would take weeks, not hours, but the direction of it was established. Cersei heard about the barracks walk before dinner. She sat in the window of her chambers and looked at the city and said nothing for a long time after. The door opened. Jaime, she didn't look at him. 2,000 men, she said. Approximately, Jaime said. He walked the barracks today, she said. Started the reorganization before the sun moved 3 positions. She was quiet. He didn't wait. He didn't settle in. He didn't spend a day establishing himself. She turned to Jaime. He already knew what he was walking into. He's been observing the watch for 2 years. Jaime said, "Of course he has." Her voice was the temperature of the window glass. "You taught him to observe." She looked at the city. A bastard ward with Robert's open favor and 2,000 armed men in the city. She said it without emphasis. "Just wait." "That is not a ward, Jaime, that is a position." Jaime said nothing. "I want to know who ordered the Riverlands ambush," she said. "I want a name." Jaime looked at her. "Do you?" he said. The word sat between them. She turned back to the window. "Find out," she said. "Before whoever it was decides to revise the approach." She paused. 2,000 men is a structural problem. I don't manage structural problems with patience. Jaime left. Cersei looked at the city, at the gold cloak patrols moving through the lower districts in the failing light. 2,000 men. And at the center of them, a boy in black and gold, with dark hair and gray eyes, and a face she had been looking at for 16 years, without ever being able to place it. She had always known the arrangement around him was constructed. She had always known Jaime had built it. What she had not known, until today, was how well. Tyrion Lannister had a gift for arithmetic. Not numbers specifically, though he was competent with those, but the arithmetic of people. The way facts about a person accumulated until they produced a sum that didn't match what you'd been told the sum should be. He had been doing this arithmetic on Jon Snow for 8 years, since Jon was old enough to be interesting. And the result had been bothering him with increasing frequency for the past 2. He brought it to Jon on a Tuesday evening in the library, which was where Tyrion brought most things he wanted to discuss without an audience. He sat down across the reading table and placed a piece of parchment between them. Jon looked at it. It was a list of dates, 14 of them in Tyrion's small, precise handwriting. Robert's campaign movements, Tyrion said. Specifically, the final year of the rebellion. I pulled them from the Master of Coin's campaign records, which are kept in the lower archive and which nobody has read since they were filed. Jon looked at the dates. "The Dornish Marches campaign stop," Jon said. "Which is where Robert's story about your mother places the relevant event," Tyrion said. "The problem is the dates." He pointed to the third entry. Robert's column was in the Dornish Marches for 11 days. He then moved to the Mander Crossing. He pointed to the fifth entry. 14 days later. Jon looked at the gap between them. "You were born," Tyrion said. "According to Robert's recollection, approximately 9 months after the Dornish Marches stop." "That's consistent," Jon said. "It would be," Tyrion said. "Except Robert's column was at the Mander Crossing when the Tower of Joy happened." He let that sit for a moment, and Robert was not at the Tower of Joy. Ned Stark was. He looked at Jon, with 6 men, fighting 3 Kingsguard. He paused. At a tower in the Dornish Marches. The library was very quiet. Ned Stark was in the Dornish Marches, Jon said, within the same general window that Robert's story places the event. Tyrion said, "Not the same location, not the same purpose, but the same general window." He folded his hands on the table. "Now, I'm not drawing a conclusion. I'm showing you an arithmetic problem. The dates don't produce the sum Robert's story requires." Jon looked at the parchment. He thought about the passage behind the Winterfell Great Hall. The 2 seconds Ned Stark had looked at him in the courtyard, and then looked away. Jaime's voice saying he looks like someone. And I know what he looks like, and I've been looking at him for 16 years. He thought about all of it and kept his face still. "Why are you showing me this?" Jon said. Tyrion looked at him with those mismatched eyes. "Because you already know something is wrong with the story," Tyrion said. "I've watched you not know it carefully for 2 years. That particular quality of not knowing, deliberate, maintained, almost disciplined, is very specific. It belongs to someone who has decided they're not ready for the answer and is managing the gap." He paused. "I'm showing you because whatever the correct sum turns out to be, you should be the one who reaches it, not someone else who reaches it first and uses it." Jon looked at the parchment for a long moment. Then he looked at Tyrion. "There's something else," Jon said. "Yes," Tyrion said. "That's not the only arithmetic problem you've been working." Tyrion was quiet. "You've been watching Jaime," Jon said. "The way he watches me, the way he places me relative to Cersei." He kept his voice even. "You've been running the arithmetic on that too." Tyrion picked up his wine. "Put it down without drinking." "My sister has 3 children," Tyrion said. "None of them look like Robert." He said it the way he said things that cost him something, flatly, without performance, absorbing the weight of it himself rather than placing it anywhere external. "I've known for years. I've done nothing with it, because doing something with it requires deciding what it's for. I haven't decided." Jon looked at him. "They look like Jaime," Jon said. Tyrion's expression did not change. The expression of a man who has already done all of his grieving for a particular fact and has arrived at something beyond it. "Yes," Tyrion said. The library held them both for a moment. "I need to see something," Jon said. "The Tower of the Hand, the upper records chamber, not the empty one. The one below it." Tyrion looked at him. "Jon Arryn's working files," Jon said. "He was investigating something before he died. Robert said so. He said it was about Slint, about corruption." He paused. "I don't think that's all it was. They went at the 2nd hour past midnight. The Tower of the Hand at that hour was as empty as anything in the Red Keep managed to be." Tyrion moved through the dark with the ease of a man who had made a study of moving through places at hours when movement was inadvisable. The records chamber was on the 3rd level. The door had a lock, standard, the kind built for discouraging rather than preventing. Tyrion had a key. He didn't explain where he'd gotten it, and Jon didn't ask. Jon Arryn's files were in the cabinet against the north wall. They were organized in the specific way of a man conducting an investigation rather than managing routine correspondence. Separate sections, each labeled in a careful hand. Financial records, staff movements, medical correspondence, and a 4th section. No label. Jon opened it. Inside, a book, small, leather-bound, the kind used for personal notation rather than official record. And loose parchments beside it, handwritten, the hand different from the label hand. Jon opened the book. It was a genealogical study. Specific to Baratheon family traits, eye color, hair color, documented through 4 generations of acknowledged Baratheon children. Bastards, trueborn, all of them. The study was thorough. Someone had spent months on it. Jon turned to the page near the back. A column of names. Robert's acknowledged bastards: Maya Stone, Edric Storm, Gendry, Barra, 4 others, each one noted beside a physical description. Hair color, all of them, dark. The seed is strong. Jon turned to the next page. Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella, hair color noted beside each. The description clinical, not accusatory, just the word, in Jon Arryn's careful hand. Fair, fair, fair. He set the book down. Tyrion had been reading over his shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a moment. He knew. Jon said. Yes, Tyrion said. His voice was the quietest Jon had ever heard it. He was building a record, Jon said. Enough to present to Robert. To force Robert to see what he'd been not seeing. He looked at the page with the 3 names. And then he died. Conveniently, Tyrion said. Jon looked at the loose parchments. The correspondent's name at the top was not a maester's name. It was Pycelle's name. And the date was 10 days before Jon Arryn's death. He put it down. Put everything back in order, the way it had been. Closed the cabinet. They went back up the stairs and through the dark corridor and down to the level where the library sat empty and pale in the moonlight from its narrow windows. Jon sat. Tyrion sat across from him. This is a law question, Jon said. Tyrion looked at him. I command the gold cloaks, Jon said. What I just read is evidence of treason, not implication. Evidence. He kept his voice steady. The law has a clear position on what happens to that evidence. It does, Tyrion said. And Jaime? Jon stopped. He looked at the table. In 16 years he had not once thought of Jaime Lannister as a thing to be managed, as a position to reckon against a law, as a piece in an arrangement that had to be accounted for when the arrangement was examined honestly. What Jaime had done for him, constructed around him, maintained, built at a cost Jon had never been able to fully calculate, was not a political fact. It was the actual substance of what Jon understood as care. The closest thing to a father the world had managed to provide. The law, Tyrion said, carefully, is administered by people. People have positions. The question isn't what the law says. You already know what it says. The question is, who receives the information and under what circumstances and what they do with it. He paused. That is not an argument for doing nothing. It's an argument for doing the right thing deliberately, not reflexively. Jon looked at him. You're not telling me to bury it, Jon said. No, Tyrion said. I'm telling you that a 16-year-old commander who presents treason evidence to the wrong person in the wrong moment will not live long enough to see it acted on. He said it without apology. Robert needs to see it. Only Robert. No intermediaries, no counsel, no process that gives the wrong people time to manage the process. He paused. And not yet. Not until Robert's position is stable enough that the revelation doesn't immediately create a vacuum that someone already positioned fills before Robert can act. Jon absorbed this. You've been thinking about this for a while, Jon said. I've been thinking about this since Joffrey was 4 years old and I looked at him and saw my brother's nose. Tyrion said. Flat, final, I've been thinking about when and not whether for a long time. Jon looked at his hands. I need Jaime to tell me the truth, Jon said. All of it, not the managed version, the actual truth about who I am and why he built this. Tyrion looked at him. Yes, Tyrion said. You do. And when I know it, when I know the full shape of it, then I'll decide what the law requires. And when. Jon looked at the library shelves. But not before. Tyrion nodded. He stood. Moved toward the door. Tyrion, Jon said. Tyrion stopped. Thank you, Jon said, for the arithmetic. Tyrion looked at him for a moment. You did most of it yourself, Tyrion said. I just gave you the parchment. He left. Jon sat in the library until the sky outside the narrow windows began to change. Then he went to find Jaime. Robert was dying. Not immediately, not in the next hour or the next day. But the wound had gone wrong in the way wounds went wrong when they were deep enough, and the patient was a man who had been drinking since before the boar found him. The maesters used careful language, which was how you knew the language mattered. They said the wound was serious, that the king needed rest. That recovery was possible with proper care. They said, possible like men who knew it was the most honest word they had available. Jon had been inside the sick room twice. The second time, Robert had been awake. Barely, his eyes had that quality of someone fighting to stay in the room against something pulling in the other direction. "Jon," Robert had said. "Your Grace." Jon had said. "The city," Robert had said. Just those two words. Nothing else. His hand had moved slightly on the coverlet, not reaching, just moving. Jon had understood. He left the sick room and did not go back. The throne room was where it started. Ned Stark had been in the Red Keep since the Progress, fulfilling duties as a lord in residence, and had been in quiet consultation with Robert in the days before the hunt. Jon had known about those consultations without knowing their content. He had noticed what they produced in Ned's bearing, a heaviness, a decision being carried. He knew now what the decision was. Ned had a document. Robert's own hand, witnessed, written before the hunting party left, naming Ned Stark Lord Regent until the rightful heir came of age. The document said rightful heir, not Joffrey. The distinction was technical. The distinction was everything. Jon learned this from Petyr Baelish. Not directly. Petyr Baelish did not tell Jon anything directly, because Petyr Baelish had the particular quality of a man who understood that direct information was a transaction, and that transactions required accounting. He told it to a man who told it to a woman who managed 2 of the lesser City Watch captains, and the woman told one of the captains, and the captain came to Jon at the 3rd hour of morning the day before the throne room. "Lord Baelish says the Lord Hand is going to move tomorrow," the captain said. His name was Holt. He was 35, competent. One of the 4 Jon had identified in the first barracks walk as having been passed over without reason. He had been loyal without being asked, which was the only kind of loyalty worth having. He says if the City Watch stands with the Hand, it goes one way. If it stands with the Lannisters, it goes another. Jon looked at him. "What does Lord Baelish want it to do?" Jon said. Holt was quiet for a moment. He didn't say directly. Holt said, "He said he was telling me so I could make an informed decision." "He's not telling you," Jon said. "He's testing which way you fall so he can tell the person he's actually working for." Holt absorbed this. "So," Jon said, "the question he's actually asking is which way I fall, and he's using you to ask it without asking it." He looked at the man. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet," Holt said. "I came to you first." Jon made 3 decisions in the space of 4 seconds. "Tell him nothing," Jon said. "And Holt, stay close to the garrison tonight. All of them. Full presence by the 6th bell tomorrow. I want every available man inside the Red Keep's walls or on the streets between here and the throne room." Holt left. Jon sent a second message. Not through channels. Directly, personally, written in his own hand and carried by a boy he trusted, because the boy had no position worth buying. He sent it to Ned Stark. The throne room assembled at the 9th bell. The small council had been called. Sir Barristan Selmy, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, stood at his post to the right of the throne. Where he always stood, where he had stood for 20 years, the most reliable fixture in the room. He had the look of a man who had arrived early and had been watching the proceedings assemble with the careful attention of someone who understood that what happened today would define what the Kingsguard was asked to be next. Joffrey stood at Cersei's right. 13 years old, in formal clothes, wearing the expression of a boy who had been told he was about to receive something and had been waiting long enough to develop certainty about the receiving. Ned entered with his household guard. 12 men, Stark livery. He had the document. Jon was already inside. He had positioned 30 gold cloaks through the throne room before anyone arrived. Not clustered, not visible as a formation. At the doors, at the columns, at the 3 secondary entrances most people didn't think to account for. Holt had the outer corridors. The Lannister household guard entered behind Cersei's procession. 40 men, red cloaks, the private army of the most powerful house in the realm. Jon counted them when they came in. He had been counting Lannister soldiers for 6 weeks. 40 versus 30. The math was not the point. Ned presented the document. He read it aloud, in the measured voice of a man who had decided that what he was doing was right and had finished arguing with himself about the cost. The words landed in the throne room the way real things landed when the room had been full of managed ones. With weight. With specific gravity. The rightful heir. Cersei's face did not move. Joffrey's did. That document, Cersei said, names no one. It is the confused writing of a dying man. She looked at Ned. The king is ill. His heir is present. The succession is clear. The succession is what the king wrote. Ned said. The king wrote nothing. Cersei said. Her voice was the temperature of the room's stone. He was given words and made to copy them. He was not competent to make legal decisions. She looked at the room, at the council members, at the Kingsguard, at the specific geography of who was standing where. Lord Stark, you have been a loyal servant of the realm. Step aside. Let the natural order proceed. Ned looked at her. Take her, Ned said. To his men. The 12 Stark guards moved. The 40 Lannister household guard moved. Jon said one word. Hold. He said it at a volume calibrated for the room's acoustics. Not a shout. The word of a man who has calculated that the volume required to be heard is different from the volume required to perform authority. The 30 gold cloaks made themselves visible. The Lannister guard stopped. Not because 30 men was an overwhelming number against 40, because 30 men positioned correctly in a room were a different proposition from 30 men standing in a line. Jon had placed them at the load-bearing geometry of the space, the doors, the columns, the secondary entrances. The Lannister guards could fight the gold cloaks, but they couldn't fight them without fighting through the only ways out of the room simultaneously. The math was still not the point. The point was the pause. The pause was 3 seconds long. In those 3 seconds, every man in the room ran his own accounting of the situation. Sir Barristan had not drawn his sword. He stood at his post, watching, and the quality of his watching was itself a position. He was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. He served the king. The king had written a document that named a regent. Barristan Selmy was not a man given to political maneuvering, which meant the document's legal weight sat with him the same way it sat with Jon, as a fact, not an interpretation. He caught Jon's eye once across the room. He did not move toward the Lannister guards. Petyr Baelish was standing at the far left of the council table. Jon looked at him directly. Baelish looked back with the expression of a man reassessing a variable he had underestimated. Not alarmed. Recalibrating, the particular quality of someone who has spent a career moving pieces and has just encountered a piece that moved itself somewhere he hadn't placed it. Cersei looked at Jon. The look lasted 4 seconds. The gold cloaks, she said, are a city force, not a political instrument. The gold cloaks serve the king. Jon said, the king named Lord Stark regent. The gold cloaks serve the regent. The king is incapacitated. The document was written before the incapacitation, Jon said. It is witnessed and sealed. The law's position on what that means is not ambiguous. Cersei looked at Jaime. Jaime was standing at the Kingsguard position, left of the throne. He did not move. The Lannister household captain, a broad man, 40 years old. The look of someone who had been through real violence and was running an accurate assessment of the current situation, looked at the gold cloak positions, looked at his own men, and did not give an order. He was reading the room correctly. This isn't finished, Cersei said. No, Jon agreed. Cersei stood. She took Joffrey's arm. She walked toward the main door, and the Lannister household guard reorganized itself around her, orderly, controlled, the specific discipline of men who have chosen a tactical retreat and are performing it with enough professionalism that it does not read as flight. They left. The throne room was held. Barristan Selmy walked to Ned Stark. He said nothing for a moment. Just looked at the document in Ned's hand with the expression of a man receiving a set of facts and processing their weight honestly. "Lord Regent," Barristan said. His voice was quiet, formal, exact. "The Kingsguard is sworn to the king and to the laws of the realm. The king has named you." He paused. "You have our swords." Ned nodded. Jon looked at Ned. Ned was looking at him with an expression that contained things Jon didn't have full names for yet. Recognition of something. Gratitude, yes, but underneath it something older and more complicated. "Lord Regent," Jon said. Ned looked at the document in his hand. Then he looked at Jon. "You knew she was going to move today," Ned said. "I was told someone was going to move." Jon said. "I didn't assume it would go cleanly." "It didn't," Ned said. His voice was flat. "This isn't over. She'll regroup. She has men in the city I don't know the full count of." "I know the count," Jon said. Ned looked at him. 43 in the Red Keep," Jon said. 68 housed in the Merchant District, 7 streets south of the Street of Steel. 12 more at a private address in the Hill District, registered to a Lannister trade representative who hasn't conducted any trade. He paused. "That's the count as of this morning. It changes. I update it." Ned was quiet for a moment. "You've been running intelligence on Lannister troop positions," Ned said. "For 6 weeks," Jon said. Ned looked at him. The expression still there, the recognition, the complicated thing underneath it. He absorbed it and set it aside the way men set things aside when there was work to finish. "The city is fractured," Ned said. "Yes," Jon said, "and she will not accept this as final." "No," Jon said. "She won't." He thought about Renly Baratheon too, Robert's younger brother, present in the capital. On the small council as master of laws, with his own ambitions and his own accounting of what Robert's death created. Whatever move Cersei made, whatever Stannis prepared on Dragonstone, Renly had his own position and his own men and his own calculation running. The city was not splitting in two, it was fracturing in more directions than that. "Lord Regent," Jon said, "we should send ravens tonight, to Stannis on Dragonstone, but also to Renly's people. Both brothers will move when they hear Robert is dying. We should know their positions before they act, rather than after." Ned looked at him. "Agreed," Ned said. Outside the throne room's high windows, King's Landing moved through its ordinary afternoon, unaware of the geometry that had just shifted in the room above it. Jon watched Ned walk toward the regent's seat. Alive, that was the word. The man who had carried a secret for 16 years, who had ridden to a tower in Dorne and ridden home with something that changed everything, who had looked at Jon in a courtyard in the north with 2 seconds of stillness that contained everything he hadn't said, that man was alive. Because Janos Slynt was not here. Because Jon was. Jaime found Jon on the wall. The same wall Jon had sat on the night the progress north was announced, the outer parapet, the 30-foot drop to the inner walkway, the city spread below in its torchlit mass. He had come here after the throne room and had been here for 2 hours, sitting with his back against the Merlin, watching the city burn its fires and move its ordinary business through the streets beneath the extraordinary thing that had happened in the room above them. Jaime sat beside him. He was out of his armor. Plain clothes, the same practice quality as the morning sessions. He looked, without the white cloak, like a man rather than an office. That was probably deliberate. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The city made its noise below. "I need you to tell me," Jon said. Jaime looked at the city. "I know," he said. "All of it," Jon said. "Not the version you've been managing. The actual account, from the beginning, every piece of it." Jaime was quiet for a long time, long enough that Jon counted the distant lights on the Blackwater and lost track at 40. "Rhaegar Targaryen," Jaime said, "and Lyanna Stark." Jon looked at him. "Rhaegar wasn't what Robert said he was," Jaime said. "He didn't take her. She went." They were married in secret before any of it, before the war, before Robert even knew she was gone. A septon performed the ceremony. The marriage was real. He stopped. When the war was over, when Rhaegar was dead at the Trident, she was still at the tower. 3 Kingsguard, Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went were holding it. Not holding her. Protecting her. He kept his eyes on the Blackwater. Protecting the child. Jon's hands were on his knees. He did not move them. Ned came with 6 men. Jaime said. They fought. Hightower and Went died early. Arthur Dayne, the finest sword I have seen in 30 years of watching swords, nearly killed every man standing. Ned survived because Howland Reed put a blade in Arthur from the side. Not from the front. From the side. He said it without flinching, but without comfort either. Arthur died. Ned went inside. Jon looked at the city. Lyanna was dying. Jaime said. She had already delivered the child. Too much blood. Too long without proper care in a desert tower. She had hours. She knew it. He paused. She made Ned promise. Keep the boy safe. Keep him from Robert. Keep him alive. The torch nearest to them had burned low. The flame was working with what it had left. I was there, Jaime said. Not inside. I came later, when the fighting was done. Ned came out of the tower carrying a child, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who had just been handed something he didn't know how to carry. He was quiet. I knew whose it was, Rhaegar's. I had served with Rhaegar. I had seen him with Lyanna before any of it became what it became. I knew the child was legitimate. Lyanna herself told Ned as much in her final hours. I knew what Robert would do if he found out. Jon said nothing. Robert would have killed him. Jaime said. Simply, without a trial, without a thought, without a moment of hesitation. A Targaryen heir, the son of the man he hated and the woman he loved. He would have smashed the boy's head against the nearest wall and called it justice. He finally looked at Jon directly. So we built something else. Jon absorbed this. The Dornish bastard, Jon said. The Dornish bastard, Jaime said. Robert had enough bastards that one more was believable. He had enough gaps in his campaign memory that the origin story didn't need to be airtight, just solid enough that no one with the ability to check would want to. And I had enough authority in the Red Keep that if I said a ward was mine to train. No one questioned the arrangement. Jon looked at his hands. You built 16 years, Jon said. Yes, Jaime said. Every piece of it. Jon said. The room in the White Sword Tower. The morning sessions. Bronn. He paused. The armor. The black and gold. The colors were a statement made so carefully that only the right people could read it and everyone else would miss it entirely. He said it without decoration. Baratheon black for the story. Lannister gold because I wanted something in it that was mine. Jon looked at the city. He tried to locate himself inside this. He had believed, for 16 years, that he was the bastard son of a king who didn't fully remember him. He had understood that this was not an ideal arrangement, and had built the best version of himself he could manage within its specific gravity. He had trained, learned, cultivated, developed, and at the center of all of it had been the assumption that he knew what he was, even if what he was wasn't much by the world's accounting. He did not know what he was. He was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. He was the legitimate product of a secret marriage between a dead prince and a dead woman, born in a desert tower and carried south in the arms of a man who was now Lord Regent of the Seven Kingdoms. He was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, or he would be if the Iron Throne were a thing that could be resolved by rightfulness. Which it couldn't, which was the only thing he understood clearly right now. What he didn't know was what any of that made him. Not politically. He would get to that later. He meant something underneath the political layer, the actual ground-level question of identity that politics sat on top of. He had been Jon Snow. He had understood what that was, had built something functional from it. Now Jon Snow was the name on a cover story, and everything he'd built from it, he stopped that line of thinking because it was going somewhere that would break him if he let it finish, and he did not have time to be broken. Ned, Jon said. He's known since the tower. Jaime said. He carried it for 16 years, Jon said. He carried it because he promised Lyanna. Jaime said, and because he is the kind of man who keeps promises regardless of the cost. Jon thought about Ned in the throne room, the document in his hand, the measured voice, the expression of a man who had decided what was right and was paying whatever the decision cost. He thought about the 2 seconds in Winterfell's courtyard. The stillness, the look away. His uncle. The word landed in a place that wasn't ready for it. Robert, Jon said. Robert loved Lyanna. Jaime said, in the way of a man who loved a fixed idea of a person, which is not quite the same as loving the person, but it was real to him. It has been real to him for 20 years. He paused. When he looked at you, he saw something that didn't fit, that he couldn't resolve. And he resolved it the way Robert resolved most things he couldn't understand. He set it aside and moved forward. He's dying, Jon said. Yes, Jaime said. Jon looked at the low torch. He was kind to me. Jon said, it came out without preparation. A true thing, unmanaged, not always, not consistently, but in the moments when he was genuinely kind. In the way of a man who wasn't always sure what I was to him, but was sure enough to be kind about the uncertainty. Jaime said nothing. He never knew, Jon said. He was kind to me, and he never knew who he was being kind to. The torch went out. They sat in the dark for a moment. What do you want me to say? Jaime said. Nothing, Jon said. There isn't anything to say. He looked at the black water. Still gold black, still moving, still indifferent to the things happening above it. What do I do with it? Jon said. That's yours, Jaime said. I built everything I could build. What you do with what you are, that was always going to be yours. Jon was quiet. He felt the grief of it, the specific grief of losing a version of yourself you had inhabited long enough to trust. Not the dramatics of it. The actual quiet weight of understanding that the ground you built on was a different ground than you thought, and that everything you built was real, and that both of those things were true simultaneously without resolving each other. He was Aegon Targaryen. He was also every morning session in the cold yard, every lesson in the alley behind the broken clasp, every session in the Kingswood, every calculation at the base of a Riverlands ridge, every decision in the barracks, the throne room. Those were real. He was also the son of a woman who died asking a man she trusted to carry something she couldn't. That was real too. He stood. Jaime looked up at him. The city is fractured, Jon said. Cersei is going to move again. She has men in the Merchant District and the Hill District, and she will not accept what happened in the throne room as final. He looked at the lights below. I need to be at the garrison by the 4th bell. Jaime stood. Jon, he said. Jon looked at him. Jaime looked at him the way he had looked at him on the best mornings in the yard, not the analytical look. Something different. The look of a man who has invested something that cannot be recovered and has never regretted the investment. Whatever house you decide you are, Jaime said, you built it yourself. The blood is what it is. The rest of it is yours. Jon looked at him for a moment. He didn't have a word for what Jaime was to him. He'd never had one. He still didn't. I know, Jon said. He went back inside. The city needed managing. He would grieve properly when it was done. Cersei moved at the 3rd hour past midnight. Jon had expected the 2nd hour. He had positioned accordingly, and the 1-hour gap cost him nothing except the specific alertness of a man who has been ready since before the thing he is ready for has decided to arrive. He was on the inner wall of the Red Keep's eastern section when Holt found him, breathing controlled, short blade at his hip, the full picture of what was happening already assembling itself from the fragments Holt was delivering. The Merchant District garrison is moving, Holt said. 68 men, Lannister colors under traveling cloaks. Split into 4 columns. Coming through the lower gate approach. The Hill District, Jon said, moving separately. 12 men toward the servants' entrance at the base of the North Tower. Jon had known about the servants' entrance. He had known because he had walked every entrance to the Red Keep 3 times since taking command of the Gold Cloaks, the way he walked every room that mattered. Learning the actual geography rather than the official one. The inner Kingsguard, Jon said. Sir Meryn and Sir Boros are with the Queen's household, Holt said. Sir Preston is on the outer rotation. He paused. Lord Commander Selmy is at the King's sick room, my lord. He hasn't moved from it. He said he'd stay at the king's side until it was done. Jon absorbed this. Barristan at the sick room was the right place for him, the most defensible position, the most personal duty, the act of a man who would not abandon his king in the final hours, regardless of what was happening in the corridors below. It also meant the sick room was guarded by the best sword in the building. Whatever came tonight, Robert would not die unprotected. "Leave Sir Barristan where he is," Jon said. "He knows his post." Jon looked at the eastern wall. He thought about the Red Keep the way Bronn had taught him to think about the alley behind the broken clasp, not as a place he lived, as a problem of geometry. The Red Keep was not a military installation in the conventional sense. It was a residence that had been fortified incrementally over 2 centuries by people with different priorities and different threat assessments, and the result was a building with more internal complexity than its exterior suggested. Corridors that connected points the official maps didn't show, stairwells that emerged onto levels that weren't accessible from the primary routes, load-bearing geometry that created choke points a defending force could use with far fewer men than an attacking force would need to overwhelm them. Jon had been mapping it for 6 weeks. He told Holt what he needed and where. The first contact happened at the lower gate. 50 gold cloaks were waiting in the service corridor behind it. Not at the gate, behind it, in the dark of the corridor, spread at the specific intervals Jon had designated, because the corridor's width at that point forced any entering force into a column of 3, regardless of how many they had started with. 68 men became a column of 3. The gold cloaks didn't fight them in the corridor. They held the far end of it, and they held the gate at the corridor's entrance simultaneously, which meant the 68 Lannister men were in a corridor with no forward movement and no retreat. The gold cloak sergeant at the far end said exactly what Jon had told him to say. Not a threat, not an ultimatum, just information delivered in the flat register of a man who has the better position and knows it. You're in a corridor with 40 men behind you and 10 in front of you and no exits between. Lord Commander's orders: set down your weapons and you'll be housed, fed, and released when the situation is resolved. Raise them, and the corridor becomes a problem you don't walk out of. The Lannister captain was professional. He ran the same accounting Jon would have run. He set down his sword. The 12 from the Hill District didn't get as far as the servants' entrance. Bronn had the north approach. Not formally. Bronn had no formal position in anything. But Jon had sent him a message at the second bell that said 3 words, "North Tower, tonight." And Bronn had appeared at the base of the North Tower with 4 men Jon didn't recognize, and the expression of someone who had been anticipating exactly this for weeks and was relieved to have it arrive. 12 men approaching a servant's entrance found Bronn on the far side of it. The fight lasted under 2 minutes. 7 of the 12 walked away from it. None of them walked away quickly. The throne room came next. Cersei had anticipated the lower gate and the North Tower. She was not a woman who built a plan around a single approach. The inner household guard, the 40 from the Red Keep itself, the ones Jon had counted and tracked since the progress, moved toward the throne room from the inside, from the residential levels, through the corridors that connected the Queen's apartments to the throne room's secondary entrance. Jon was in the throne room when they arrived. 20 gold cloaks, the load-bearing positions same as before, the doors, the columns, the secondary entrances, and Ned Stark with 4 household men standing at the center of the room with the document in his hand and the expression of a man who had expected this. The Lannister inner guard came through the secondary entrance. Their captain looked at the room's configuration and looked at Jon and stopped walking. "Lord Commander," the captain said. "Captain," Jon said. The man ran his accounting. He was thorough about it. Jon gave him the time to be thorough because the thoroughness was working in the same direction as everything else tonight. "Lord Commander," the captain said again. Different register this time. "I have my orders." "I know," Jon said. "And you're a professional, so you understand that orders exist inside a situation, and the situation is the primary fact." He looked at the man directly. "Your orders were written when the situation was different. The situation is not different in a way that favors the orders." The captain looked at his men. At the gold cloaks. At the geometry. He hadn't set down his sword yet. Then Joffrey came through the door behind him. He was in his formal clothes. Sword at his hip, a real one, not a training blade. The first time Jon had seen him carry live steel outside of a formal ceremony. His face had the expression Jon had seen in the practice yard, scaled up to something larger and uglier. The expression of a boy who had decided that what he wanted was being withheld by people who didn't have the right to withhold it. He looked at Jon. "Stand down," Joffrey said. His voice was almost steady. "Not quite." Jon looked at him. "Your Grace," Jon said. "You need to step back through that door. You don't give me orders," Joffrey said. "You're a bastard ward. You command the city watch. You don't command me. Tonight I command everything inside these walls." Jon said, "That includes this room. Step back." Joffrey's hand went to his sword. Jon watched him wrap his fingers around the hilt, watched the knuckles go white, watched the specific theater of a 13-year-old boy deciding whether to draw a sword in a room full of armed men because the alternative was walking backward through a door, which was the only thing he found less tolerable. Jon crossed the distance in 4 steps, not fast enough to be alarming, fast enough to be there before anything else was decided. He put his hand over Joffrey's on the hilt, not gripping, not pulling, just covering. His hand over the boy's hand, and the weight of the hand communicating everything that a room full of people watching did not need to see performed in steel and blood. He looked at Joffrey from 2 feet away. "I know what you want," Jon said. Quiet, just for Joffrey. "I know what this looks like to you and what you think it means about who you are, but there are 40 men in this room who will follow whoever holds this room correctly. If you draw that sword, you will not hold this room. You will be a boy who drew a sword in a room that told him not to." He held the eye contact, walked back through the door. "That's the move that costs you the least of what you still have." Joffrey's eyes were bright, the brightness of someone running at the edge of their own capacity for this. He walked back through the door. The Lannister inner guard captain set down his sword. Cersei was in the corridor outside the Queen's apartments when Jaime found her. She had heard the throne room. Not the sounds of fighting, there weren't enough of those. The sounds of not fighting, which were their own information. She was standing in the torchlight with the stillness of a woman who has received a fact she already knew was coming and is deciding what the fact requires. Jaime stopped in front of her. "It's done," he said. "Tonight," she said. "Cersei, don't," she said. They looked at each other in the corridor. Jaime and Cersei, in the torchlight, with 16 years of everything between them and the specific weight of tonight on top of it. "You chose him," she said. "I didn't have to choose," Jaime said. "It was already decided. Tonight only made it visible." Her face went through something that lasted 1 second and then closed. Something genuine, underneath the control, that the control moved to cover before it was fully formed. "The children," she said, "are safe," Jaime said. "Nobody is touching the children. Ned Stark is not a man who harms children. And me," she said. Jaime was quiet. "You'll be held," he said. "Until it's resolved. Until Robert," he stopped. They both understood what the end of that sentence was. Cersei looked at him for a long moment. The green eyes, the golden hair, the beauty that had been a weapon for so long that the weapon and the person had become inseparable. "I want it noted," she said, "that I did what I did for my children, not for power, not for the reasons people will say." She held his eyes. "For my children." "I know," Jaime said. And he did. She walked back into the Queen's apartments. Jaime stood in the corridor alone for a moment. He thought about the white cloak, about what it meant and what it had cost and what it had built around, and whether the building was worth the cost. He thought about a vow sworn at 17 to a king who was already mad, and about all the subsequent kings the vow had transferred to by default, and about whether a vow could survive the complete transformation of everything it had been sworn to protect. He had a question to ask Ned Stark in the morning. Then he walked toward the throne room. Jon was at the window when Jaime arrived. The same window he always went to, the northern exposure, the city below, the black water beyond it. Ned was in quiet conference with Holt near the door. The gold cloaks were reorganizing the room back to functional. The Lannister household guard was being housed in the lower barracks under watch. Jaime stood beside him. The city moved below, unaware as always. "Joffrey," Jaime said. "He walked away." Jon said. "He's in his rooms. Holt has men on the corridor. He'll hate you." Jaime said. "I know." Jon said. "I gave him the choice that cost him the least. He'll hate me for the choice being his to make." Jaime looked at the city. "Cersei is secured," he said. Jon nodded. The inner guard surrendered. The merchant district and hill district men are held. Jon looked at the torchlight on the water. By morning the city will know. By morning the city will be deciding what it knows. Jaime said. "Yes," Jon said. "That's different." They stood at the window. "Robert," Jon said. "The maesters say before dawn," Jaime said. Quiet, Jon looked at the Blackwater, the man who had never known who he was being kind to, the man who had called him mine with the roughness of a word that didn't fit comfortably in the mouth, the man who had looked at him at the north window of an empty records room and started a sentence he hadn't finished. Jon had not finished it either. "Barristan is with him," Jon said. "Yes," Jaime said. A pause. "The right place for him. In the morning," Jon said. "I need you to ask Ned something on my behalf. Or ask him yourself, for your own reasons." Jaime looked at him. "The Kingsguard vows," Jon said. "As regent, Ned has the authority to release a sworn brother from his oath, to formally dismiss him from service, if the brother requests it." He looked at Jaime. "You built 16 years. You don't owe the White Cloak anything more than you've already given it." Jaime was quiet. "What I owe," Jaime said, "is a complicated question." "I know," Jon said. "But you should be the one who decides what you owe, not the cloak." Jaime said nothing for a long moment. "I'll speak with Ned," he said finally. Jon stayed at the window until the city below began to gray toward morning. Robert died at the 4th hour before dawn. The maester came out of the sick room and said what maesters said when kings died. Careful language, clinical, the words of a man whose job required him to deliver enormous facts in the smallest possible containers. Jon was in the corridor outside. He had been there for 2 hours, not because anyone required it of him, but because the corridor was where he had ended up when the city's business was finally settled enough for him to stop moving. He heard the words. He stood in the corridor for a moment after the maester left. Then he went inside. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms went quiet after the last person had finished being loud in them. The candles were still burning. Someone had folded Robert's hands on the coverlet in the formal way, which was the first formal thing that had been done for him tonight. His face was still. Not peaceful exactly, the word people used, peace, implied a transition, something arrived at. Robert's face was just finished, the particular stillness of something that had been enormous, and was now the memory of its own enormity. Barristan Selmy was standing at the foot of the bed. He had been there all night. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, who had served Robert Baratheon for 15 years, and had stood at his post in the final hours the way he had stood at every other post. Without deviation, without complaint, with the specific gravity of a man who understood that duty was not diminished by the inability of its object to acknowledge it. He looked at Jon when Jon came in. Neither of them said anything for a moment. He was a good man once. Barristan said. He said it the way old soldiers said things that cost them, simply, without seeking confirmation. Before the throne changed him. Before all of it. Jon stood at the foot of the bed. "I know," Jon said. Barristan looked at Robert's face for another moment. Then he straightened, the way a man straightens when he has finished one thing and is preparing for the next. "What happens now?" Barristan said. "Lord Stark is regent," Jon said. "The document holds. The succession is his to manage." Barristan nodded slowly. "And you?" "I hold the city," Jon said, "until it doesn't need holding." Barristan looked at him with the expression of a man running an assessment he had been running since the throne room. Something in it settled. "You'll do," Barristan said. It was the highest praise in his vocabulary, and they both knew it. Jon left him with Robert. The small council assembled at dawn. Not the full council. Grand Maester Pycelle was absent, which was information Jon had already acted on before the sun came up. Pycelle was in his chambers under Goldcloak watch, his correspondence from the months before Jon Arryn's death sealed and catalogued by Holt. What the correspondence would prove formally was a matter for the law. What it proved functionally, Jon already knew. Ned sat at the head of the table. The document that named him regent was sealed and witnessed and valid. The law's position was clear. The practical position was also clear, which was that a legal document became functional only when the people required to implement it understood that the implementation was real rather than theoretical. Both conditions were met. Varys was present. He had been present throughout, not visibly, not loudly, in the specific way Varys was present through everything. Moving at the edges, observing, recalibrating, he looked at Jon across the table with the expression he wore when he had encountered a variable his accounting had underestimated. "Lord Commander," Varys said. His voice was mild, deliberately mild. "A productive evening." "Yes," Jon said. "The city is secured. The immediate threats are contained," Jon said. "The city is never fully secured." Varys looked at him with something that was not quite amusement and not quite its opposite. Petyr Baelish was also present. He had the expression he had worn since the throne room, the recalibrating expression. He looked at Jon, and then at Ned, and then at the geometry of the table, running the arithmetic of the new arrangement, deciding what positions were still available. Jon looked at him directly. Baelish held the eye contact for 3 seconds. Then he looked at his own hands. Ned spoke. The regent's business was practical and substantial, the immediate order of the succession, the disposition of Cersei and the children. The messages that needed to go out before the realm had time to organize its own interpretation of events around the absence of official information. Jon listened. He answered the questions directed at him: the Goldcloak dispositions, the status of the Lannister household guard, the security of the city's gates. He answered with the same flatness he used for everything: facts, positions, the accurate accounting of what existed. At the end of the council, when the specific business was resolved and the room was beginning to move toward its dispersal, Ned looked at Jon. "Walk with me," Ned said. They walked to the sept, which was empty at this hour, and through the sept to a small garden that sat behind it, enclosed on 3 sides by stone walls and open to the sky on the 4th. They sat on a stone bench. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that committed to itself without apology. "I knew your mother," Ned said. Jon looked at the open sky above the garden wall. "I know," Jon said. Ned was quiet for a moment. "She was the most determined person I have ever known," he said. "More than Robert, who was determined in the way of men who don't consider the alternative. More than any general or lord or king I've served. She decided things with her whole self, and she paid the cost of her decisions without complaint, and she asked one thing of me before he stopped." The sentence finished itself in the silence. Jon let it. "I couldn't tell you," Ned said. "Every year I didn't tell you was a choice I made and remade. There were years when it felt like the right choice. There were years when it felt like cowardice dressed as caution." He looked at his hands. Both things were true. "I know," Jon said again. Ned looked at him. "Are you angry?" Ned said. Jon considered the question honestly. "No." He said, "I understand the shape of it. I understand what you were protecting and why." He looked at the sky. "I'm still learning what I am, but I'm not angry about the learning." Ned nodded slowly, the nod of a man absorbing something he hoped was true and was choosing to believe it. "Catelyn will need to know," Ned said. "Yes," Jon said. "She will find it." He searched for the word. "Difficult," Jon said. "Yes," Ned said. "She is not a cruel woman. She is a woman who was given a cruel set of facts and was never given the tools to process them honestly." He was quiet. "When she understands the full truth, that the boy she resented was Lyanna's son, not proof of my infidelity, I don't know what she does with that. I know she's capable of it. I know she'll need time." Jon nodded. "Winterfell," Jon said. Ned looked at him. "Go home," Jon said. "When this is settled enough to hold without you here, go back to Winterfell. Take your family home. What's happening in King's Landing is going to be ugly and political and drawn out, and the North doesn't need to be inside it while it resolves. Ned studied him. And you? Ned said. I'll stay, Jon said. The city needs managing. The succession needs resolving. He paused. Stannis has the stronger legal claim. He is Robert's eldest surviving brother, and his right is clear. He should hold the regency when the time comes, and I'll support that transition. But Renly will move too. He's in the city, he has support among the younger lords, and he'll see Robert's death as an opening. Jon looked at the garden wall. The transition between Ned's regency and Stannis's claim needs to happen before Renly acts, before the realm fractures between the brothers and pulls everyone into it. Ned looked at him. You've thought this through, Ned said. I've had time, Jon said. The city gives you time to think, if you use it correctly, and if Stannis won't accept the arrangement, Ned said. If he comes with swords instead of ravens. Then we explain the gold cloaks, and the garrison, and the 2,000 men who are already here, Jon said. Stannis is a military man. He understands math. Ned almost smiled. It went somewhere else before completing. You're not claiming the throne, Ned said. No, Jon said. You have the better claim than anyone alive. Ned said. Legitimate Targaryen, son of Rhaegar. I have a claim, Jon said. Claims need more than blood behind them. They need time, support, a realm that's capable of hearing the truth without tearing itself apart processing it. He looked at his hands. Maybe someday the realm is ready for that. I don't know. But today it needs a regent who isn't disputed, and a city that isn't on fire. He paused. I can provide the second. Stannis can provide the first. Ned looked at him for a long moment. The expression was the full version of the thing Jon had seen in pieces, in the courtyard, in the corridor, in the throne room, all of it assembled into something that was grief and pride and relief in proportions Jon didn't have the mathematics for. She would be proud of you, Ned said. Jon looked at the sky. He let himself feel that. Just for a moment, Jaime found Ned before the second bell. Jon was not present for the conversation. He had asked for it, and had removed himself from it, because some things needed to happen without him watching. But Holt told him afterward what the shape of it had been, and the shape was this. Jaime Lannister had walked into the Regent's Solar in plain clothes, without his white cloak, and had asked to be formally released from his Kingsguard vows. Ned Stark, as Lord Regent, had the authority to grant this. He had looked at Jaime for a long moment, the Kingslayer, the man he had despised for 15 years, the man who had raised Lyanna's son with genuine care in the only place he could have kept him safe, and he had granted it. The white cloak was folded on the Regent's table when Jon came through the Solar an hour later. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up. The gold cloak garrison at midday had the particular quality of a place that has been through something and is now on the other side of it. Not relaxed, alert, functional, moving with the purpose of an institution that has been tested and has held and knows it has held. Bronn was at the gate. He was leaning against the gatehouse wall, eating something Jon couldn't identify, watching the street with the specific quality of a man at leisure who is not at leisure. City's quiet. Bronn said when Jon arrived. So far, Jon said. It'll stay quiet, Bronn said. People felt the change last night. They don't know what it is yet. Confusion keeps people indoors. He ate whatever he was eating. Give it 3 days, and someone will start deciding what opinion they should have been holding all along. Jon stood beside him at the gate. They watched the street. The morning traffic, the carts, the ordinary business of 500,000 people who had woken up in a city where a king had died and hadn't yet reorganized their lives around the fact. You're staying, Bronn said. Yes, Jon said. Not on the throne. Bronn said. Not yet, Jon said. Bronn was quiet. Yet, he said. Not as a challenge, just noting the word. Jon looked at the street. The imp's idea? Bronn said. My idea, Jon said. Tyrion's arithmetic. Bronn made the sound that was not quite a laugh. Then, Jaime was there. He came through the inner gate. Plain clothes. No white cloak. For the first time in 15 years, no white cloak. He looked like a man who had set down something heavy and was still adjusting to the absence of the weight. He stood on Jon's right side. He looked at the street the way Jon was looking at it. The three of them stood at the gate. Jon in the center, Jaime on his right, Bronn on his left. The city moved in front of them, indifferent, enormous, managing itself through another morning with the specific resilience of a thing that has been surviving for long enough that survival has become structural. "What now?" Bronn said. Jon looked at the street of steel in the distance, at the black water beyond the rooftops, at the sky above it all, gray and committed, and not promising anything except more weather. "Now we hold it," Jon said, "and we see what the realm becomes when someone holds it correctly." Bronn grunted. Jaime said nothing. The city moved. Jon Snow, who was also Aegon Targaryen, who was also the boy from the White Sword Tower, who was also the product of 2 men's competing philosophies and 1 woman's dying request, and 16 years of careful, costly, deliberate construction, stood at the gate of the Red Keep and held what he had been built to hold. Not a throne. Not yet. The city. The people in it. The ordinary and extraordinary business of 500,000 lives, organized around the possibility that the person at the center of power was worth organizing around. He had not been given this. He had made it. The ravens flew north that afternoon, carrying word to Winterfell. Ned Stark would read the message in his great hall, and Catelyn Stark would stand beside him. And somewhere in the castle a auburn-haired boy named Robb would ask what the message said, and somewhere else Arya would already be moving toward the door before anyone answered, because Arya was always already moving. The North would know. And in King's Landing, in the city that smelled of ambition and rot, in the Red Keep that sat at the top of everything like a nail driven through the center of the world, something had changed. Not finished, not clean, not simple, just changed. And Jon Snow was in it, and holding it, and that was enough for today. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.